I think I'll just haul off and go fishing yesterday.
Ladies and gentlemen, tonight I will take you into a story that echoes far beyond the rolling hills of Tennessee. A story that, if you've heard it at all, has likely been reduced to a cautionary tale. But I assure you, the truth runs deeper, much deeper. David Stringbean Akeman was a beloved figure of country music, a banjo-picking comedian whose lanky figure and oversized overalls brought joy to millions. But behind the laughter, behind the silly songs and country humor, was a man haunted by a fear he never spoke aloud. On a quiet night in November 1973, Stringbean and Estelle Akeman were brutally murdered inside their log cabin. The motive? Money. But not just any money. You see, Stringbean didn't believe in banks. He believed in hiding his cash, beneath floorboards, behind walls, inside fishing tackle boxes. And here's the part few have heard. Long after his death, workers renovating that same cabin began uncovering rolled-up stacks of old bills, tens of thousands of dollars, forgotten by time, sealed behind wood and dust. Why did he live like this? Who knew about the money? And what secret did he take to the grave? Stay with me, dear audience, because what's buried in this story might just shake you. Ladies and gentlemen, before we uncover the chilling secret that lingered in the walls of that Tennessee cabin, we must first understand the man who put it there. David Akeman, known to the world as Stringbean. Born in 1915 in the hills of Annville, Kentucky, David Akeman didn't come from music royalty. He came from dirt floors and hard winters, from a time when every penny was sacred. Like many who lived through the Great Depression, he learned early that banks could close overnight, and a man's savings could vanish like smoke. That fear, quiet, constant, would stay with him for the rest of his life. But young David had one gift. He could make a banjo sing. And not just sing, he could make it laugh. By his late teens, he was performing at local dances and gatherings. The name Stringbean was first tossed at him as a joke for his rail-thin body and long arms. But instead of fighting it, he embraced it. It became his brand, his armor, his second skin. He soon joined the legendary Bill Monroe's Bluegrass Boys, making his mark as one of the earliest banjo pickers to bring the instrument out front. But it wasn't just his playing that won people over. It was the entire act. The high-waisted pants, the floppy hat, that crooked grin that made people forget their troubles for a moment. In 1945, he married Estelle Stanfill, his lifelong partner in every sense. She was graceful, soft-spoken, and fiercely protective of him. They had no children, but they had each other. Always. Estelle was at every show, every tour stop, every backstage corner, standing in the shadows with watchful eyes. She understood the world didn't treat kind men kindly. When Stringbean joined the cast of Hee Haw in the late 1960s, his popularity soared. Millions of Americans watched him every week as he traded jokes with Buck Owens and Roy Clark. To most, he was a lovable, silly character with a banjo in hand and a heart full of mischief. But here's what few knew. He never bought anything new, not a car, not a suit, not even shoes unless absolutely necessary. He saved every dollar, folded it neatly, and stashed it away, in places no one would think to look. He'd once told a friend, "A man can't lose what he don't flash around." His fellow Opry members knew he was frugal. Some even teased him, but no one suspected just how deeply rooted his paranoia ran. He didn't trust banks. He didn't trust safes. He barely trusted locks. The only person who knew where the money went was Estelle. And yet, despite this guarded nature, Stringbean was generous in spirit. He gave to his church, helped younger musicians, and stayed loyal to his hometown. Fame never changed him, it only widened his smile. To the public, he was the perfect picture of down-home contentment, a humble man with a banjo, a loving wife, and a steady career. But behind closed doors, he walked the line between caution and fear, between laughter and dread. And one November night, that fear would come crashing down in the most violent way imaginable. Ladies and gentlemen, the year was 1973. The leaves had fallen from the Tennessee trees, and the chill of November had settled deep into the soil. For Stringbean and Estelle Akeman, it was supposed to be another ordinary Saturday night. They had just finished performing at the Grand Ole Opry, Stringbean's usual act, the familiar laughter, the same old banjo, and then made their way back home to their cabin in Ridgetop, a quiet town just outside of Nashville. But someone was waiting for them. Or rather, two someones. John and Marvin Douglas, two half-brothers from a troubled background, petty thieves, drifters, and by most accounts, dangerously reckless. They had heard a rumor that Stringbean kept large amounts of cash hidden in his home. And in a time when cash meant quick escape and no trace, that rumor was a spark to dry kindling. They broke into the Akeman cabin while the couple was still at the Opry. They tore through drawers, poked behind curtains, but didn't find what they came for. So they waited. What happened next was as senseless as it was cruel. Around 1 a.m., Stringbean and Estelle pulled into their driveway. The lights were off. The house was too quiet. As Stringbean stepped inside, John Douglas fired the first shot. Stringbean fell near the doorway. Estelle, hearing the chaos, ran screaming from the house, but she didn't get far. They shot her too. Cold, precise, no mercy. When friends discovered the bodies the next morning, the news sent shockwaves across Nashville. A man who brought nothing but joy, gunned down in his own home, with his wife, over money. But here's the tragic twist. The killers didn't find what they were looking for. The cash they thought would be lying around in neat stacks was buried deeper than they imagined. Hidden inside walls, stuffed into boots, rolled behind old shelves, so well concealed that not even the police found it during the initial investigation. In the days following the murder, country stars from all corners of the South came together in mourning. Roy Acuff was inconsolable. Grandpa Jones, who had planned to pick up Stringbean the morning after the show, collapsed in grief when he arrived to find police tape and silence. The Grand Ole Opry dimmed its lights, and Nashville, so often a city of bright songs and radio jingles, was suddenly hushed. Authorities arrested the Douglas brothers within weeks. They were tried, convicted, and sentenced. Justice, on paper, was served. But the house, the cabin, still held its secrets. Years passed, ownership changed, the murders faded from headlines. But then, almost 2 decades later, contractors renovating the old cabin made a stunning discovery. Tucked behind a brick in the fireplace, a small stash of money. Then, behind a cabinet wall, more. Rolled up, faded with time, hidden so meticulously it had escaped the eyes of detectives. In total, Nearly $20,000 in cash was found, never touched, never claimed, and never spoken about publicly. It was as if Stringbean's fear had become a prophecy. He hadn't trusted the world to keep him safe, so he tried to control what he could: his home, his money, his privacy. And in the end, that fear didn't save him. It led him to a death he'd long feared. But it also left behind a riddle, one that still whispers through those Tennessee trees and in the hearts of those who remember. Ladies and gentlemen, if Stringbean's life was a melody, then his death was a jarring silence. And yet the aftermath, the years that followed, played out like a mournful verse that no one quite knew how to finish. Inside the Grand Ole Opry, his absence was felt like a missing chord. Friends tried to carry on. Roy Acuff wept openly during performances. Minnie Pearl described the stage as heavier without him. And Grandpa Jones, who had been just minutes away from driving Stringbean home that night, struggled for years with what-ifs. "If I'd only gotten there a little earlier," he once whispered, "maybe none of this would have happened." But deeper than grief was fear. Because Stringbean's murder didn't just rob the community of a beloved friend, it exposed a truth many artists had quietly shared: that no amount of fame could guarantee safety. If a man like Stringbean could be murdered in his own home, after decades of giving joy to the world, then what protection was there for any of them? The country music world began to change. Artists hired private security. Lockboxes and safes became as common backstage as microphones. And behind closed doors, the whispers grew louder. How much did he really have hidden? Who else might have known? Could someone from inside the circle have talked? Some rumors refused to die. There were whispers that the killers had been tipped off by someone close to the Opry. Others believed the murder wasn't just about cash, it was about jealousy. Even the manner in which the money was hidden stoked curiosity. Some claimed Estelle herself had created a system, a map of hiding spots, known only to her and her husband, a map that was never found. And then came the discoveries, like ghost notes left behind long after the song had ended. In 1993, nearly 20 years after the killings, $2,000 in cash was discovered inside an old, forgotten safe beneath a floorboard. Then, in 1996, another envelope of bills, so old that they had started to decompose, was found behind a cupboard drawer. The bills bore dates from the 1950s and 60s. Each find reignited speculation. How much more was left behind? Had all of it been accounted for? One of Stringbean's close friends once confided to a reporter, he always said he didn't trust banks, said the ground and the walls were safer, safer than men in suits. The irony is painful. What he trusted became his coffin. John and Marvin Douglas, the two murderers, were sentenced to 99 years in prison. John died in custody, but Marvin, after decades behind bars, applied for parole in 2011. When word of it reached Nashville, an outcry followed. Petitions were signed. Opry members voiced their anger. Grandpa Jones's widow said he didn't just take their lives, he took away a piece of all of us. That same year, the Tennessee Parole Board rejected the request. Still, the wound remained open. Because Stringbean's story was no longer just about a murder. It had become a fable, a warning, a reflection of something deeper. How a life filled with joy could end so violently. How a man who trusted no one might have been betrayed from within. And how the most harmless of entertainers could be remembered not for his laughter, but for the tragedy no one could explain away. And as the years went by, one final question lingered louder than the rest. Did Stringbean know this was coming? Because some say, in the weeks before his death, he started carrying a pistol in his banjo case. Ladies and gentlemen, in tragedy, some stories wither away. Others somehow deepened with time, like roots sinking further into the earth. Stringbean's was the latter. His murder didn't just make headlines, it settled into the soul of Nashville. But the ending, though never truly just, found its own quiet reckoning. In the late 1990s, a new owner bought the Akeman cabin with plans to renovate it. What they didn't expect was to find the past still alive inside those walls. Behind an old fireplace mantel, they discovered what looked like crumpled paper, until closer inspection revealed stacks of $20 bills, browned by age but intact. Then, behind a ceiling beam, more money, carefully tucked into a leather pouch tied with string. All told, more than $20,000 in cash would be found over the years, each discovery like a whisper from a man long gone. It was as if Stringbean had tried to build his own bank inside the house, brick by brick, secret by secret. But he never lived to reclaim it. What happened to the money? In a decision both respectful and poignant, the Akeman estate, guided by surviving relatives and close friends, donated the recovered funds to music education scholarships in Kentucky. Not a dollar was kept. Every bill was turned into opportunity, melody, and memory for young musicians who would never know the man behind it all. And perhaps that's where the healing began. In the years following the tragedy, fellow Opry performers kept Stringbean's spirit alive. Marty Stewart paid tribute in interviews, saying he was one of the real ones, pure country, pure kindness. A plaque bearing his name still rests inside the Opry backstage hallway, beside the very curtain he used to emerge from, smiling and waving, banjo in hand. Estelle was buried beside him, husband and wife, side by side, in a quiet cemetery just outside Goodlettsville. No grand tomb, no towering monument, just two names carved into stone, simple, like the life they lived. And while justice came late, and peace even later, there was something undeniably poetic in how it all settled. The money hidden in fear was transformed into gifts of hope. The silence that followed their deaths was filled by a new generation of banjo pickers and storytellers, many of whom were inspired by the very man who once stood center stage in oversized pants and a crooked smile. Because after all, ladies and gentlemen, even when evil takes away a life, it cannot erase a legacy. Ladies and gentlemen, after all this time, the story of Stringbean Akeman still leaves us with questions far heavier than the cash she left behind. Was he right to live in fear, to stuff money into crevices of wood and stone, to trust no one but his wife, to carry a pistol instead of peace? Or did his past, shaped by poverty, by the Great Depression, by the gnawing hunger of youth, never really allow him to feel safe, no matter how much applause he earned? We often say that fame brings security, that love conquers fear. But what if neither was ever enough? Dear viewers, I ask you this. If you lived through days where banks failed and families lost everything, Could you ever truly rest easy again? Could you trust the world to hold your savings, your secrets, your life? And if you had known danger might come knocking one night, would you hide your fortune in the walls too? Stringbean wasn't a man of scandals or headlines. He didn't chase limelight or power. He simply wanted to entertain, to live quietly, and to protect what little he had. But in the end, even his silence became part of the mystery, part of the heartbreak. So tonight I leave you with this thought. Behind every smiling face, there may live a story of fear. Behind every old cabin in the wood, a secret. Behind every cheerful banjo tune, the echo of something unspoken. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening. And remember, sometimes the most unforgettable songs are the ones we never get to hear in full. Good night.